I felt United showed a lot of glimpses of class and quality, actually, but they were always in second or third gear.
How long are we going to give Wirtz and Isak to actually step up?
95 days ago, they won the Europa League. To get rid of 6 first-teamers at once is always going to be very difficult.
Hello and welcome to The Game podcast from The Times and Sunday Times. The Premier League is back, and if the opening weekend is anything to go by, this season will be more unpredictable than ever. Thrilling wins for Hull City, Brentford and Brighton, humbling defeats for Manchester United, Tottenham Hotspur and Aston Villa, late drama in wins for Manchester City, Leeds United and Ipswich Town, and even later drama as Liverpool nicked a point against an impressive Newcastle United. I'm Gregor Robertson, and joining me on today's show to discuss what it all means, we have The Times senior sports writer Alyson Rudd, The Times London football reporter Gary Jacob, and The Times columnist and feature writer James Gheerbrant. Guys, great to have you all. So much to pack into today's show, we need to get straight to it, and I thought we'd approach it in order of shock value. First of all, though, I'll ask you all, would you agree that Hull's 2-0 defeat of Manchester United this weekend was the shock of the weekend?
It was, because absolutely everybody, every single canvassing of opinion I read, everyone had Hull to go down.
It was getting a bit kind of disrespectful, actually, wasn't it?
And for Man United to continue the great end of the season they had when Michael Carrick was appointed. So
Indeed.
There was zero expectation that the match would unfold the way it did.
You guys agree?
Well, I think on results, it's definitely Hull. Where I think if you bring scorelines into it, I think, or just then the circumstances of the match more generally, I think with Villa losing 4-0 against Brighton, 95 days after they won the Europa League final, 11 days after they pushed Paris Saint-Germain all the way in the Super Cup was pretty remarkable.
James was at that game, so we'll come to you to discuss that very shortly. Gary, do you agree?
I'm going for Brentford.
You're going for Brentford?
Not because to disrespect the Brentford, but just because I thought Tottenham I didn't expect that from Tottenham.
Okay.
The fact they just didn't compete at all. And he's had them in for pre-season, hadn't he, in the last season. That was a real shock to me, because it could have been a lot more, couldn't it?
Okay. Well, the deciding vote's with me, so we're starting with Hull tonight. Throwback to days of Ruben Amorim raises questions for Michael Carrick. That's the headline in Ian Whittle's piece in the game today. Look, it's one game, it's the opening day, but Alyson, Michael Carrick did not need this kind of result and performance, did he?
No, it was very one-geared. So Gary raised Spurs. I thought it would be quite easy to lump Spurs and Man United into the same category there, but I felt United showed a lot of glimpses of class and quality, actually. I think you could tell they were a good team. They occasionally purred, but they were always in second or third gear. And they did not respond to what was in front of them. It was as though they refused to accept what was happening to them. So they were being bullied in midfield. They were really physical without being overtly physical, but they were physical enough, Hull. They were hugely confident. Their set-piece delivery, I think they'd said that they'd spotted that as a potential weakness in the way Man United set up. Balls whizzed into the box. United just played as if they wanted to snub Hull and pretend they didn't exist. It was really strange. They didn't make any changes that made any difference. It was so one-dimensional. There was touches of class, and Bumo's attempted a bicycle kick. There was stuff there that was nice, but what was overwhelmingly arresting just from watching it was that they did not shift out of third gear. Was the best they got into. And I just feel that you mentioned the word disrespect. It was as if they disbelieved that Hull could have been quite that good. I was overwhelmingly impressed by the atmosphere at the stadium. I think in a lot of those pre-season predictions about who will go down, I don't think people factored in that if your home form is going to be influenced by riotous, loud, overwhelming fandom like that's just relentless, you will get results that people don't expect you to get, and it will be enough to save you from relegation. It was an eye-opener, but this idea that teams that play 5 across the back are act as a thorn in the side of Man United. All you can do is say, well done Hull for identifying that and going for that system, because another reason why a team might escape relegation is because they take each team as it comes and adapt accordingly. That's what you do when you're the smaller club. You try and find little nicks and ways to get through them, and that's exactly what Hull did. But the overwhelmingly, if you're Man United, you've got to stop this idea that you're superior and not react.
James, I think Ian Whittle's kind of reference to Ruben Amorim was largely about the sort of lack of intensity and drive looks like kind of their will to win in an open day of a Premier League campaign. That, as I said at the start, that's exactly what Michael Carrick does not want when you're someone who has been given the job on a permanent basis after a positive end to last season, but there are still the echoes of the sort of Ole Gunnar Solskjaer era and how that kind of eventually unravelled as well.
Well, and also because looking at the fixture list, I mean, we were asked in our pre-season predictions which manager might find themselves under pressure. And I went for Carrick on the basis of United have a very tough-looking sort of October, November stretch, sort of run of 8 games. Obviously, we're getting quite far ahead of ourselves. But the point being that they begin with games against 2 promoted teams, and I think everyone was expecting them to have 6 points on the board. And of course, now suddenly they find themselves on the back foot.
Gary, what did you make of it?
Isn't it just about basics, isn't it? I think Alyson and I were sort of Arsenal Coventry, and that newly promoted team comes up, and I thought Arsenal they were strong at the start, weren't they? They put their foot down, and they weren't going to allow, I know they're at home, so it's different, but they weren't going to allow the newly promoted team to be physical, to do with the things. And you just got the impression that United allowed Hull to do what they wanted to do. And also, I mean, Luke Shaw's mistakes was a poor mistake. The goals were poor, weren't they, to kind of concede when you look at it. It's a free kick and he drops back in. And also there was lack of pace in midfield. That obviously they've got Baleba going to come in, so maybe that will make a difference. But
you see lack of pace in midfield. They've just signed 2 midfielders, and
Tielemans is a class player, but he hasn't got any legs, has he?
So you think Baleba would make a difference in midfield for them?
That he obviously thinks. He was obviously going for he or Lewis Skelly, one of the two, and obviously they've gone for Baleba. And I think that may make a difference. I'm not sure about Heaven at centre back. Obviously, he's a young kid. He was at Arsenal. He's had a little bit. That's quite a chastising experience for him.
It's quite. If you look at the sort of central defensive spine of United, it's quite a callow kind of. You've got Lamans in goal, who is obviously still very young for a goalkeeper for that position, especially. Obviously, he did have a very good season last season. Heaven starting at centre back, who, as Gary said, is another very young player. They've now brought in Andre Santos to start in central midfield. Another. It's quite a sort of that sort of central kind of spine of 5 players. There's a lot of youth in there. Obviously, you've got Maguire started as well, kind of sort of compensating a little bit for that. But
although, did we see the way he clutched Mazraoui in the penalty box in the build up to I think it was Ajayi's goal? He's marking his own player. It's a kind of bizarre thing that's kind of turns into a bit of a meme.
Have you been in that experience before, Gregor, where you've been a come up against a newly promoted team where they're really at you on that first game?
Yeah, and I've been that team as well. When you're the thing with Hull is it did kind of tilt into a bit of disrespect, I think, and they've used that as motivation even last season in the Championship, because the context is quite important with Hull. There's a good reason why they have been written off. I mean, they stayed up on goal difference at the end of the season before last. They had a transfer embargo last season, so they're a team of, it's been cobbled together on free transfers. The manager's a complete unknown, and it was a revelation. They snuck into the playoffs, scored in the last minute.
So it's not really disrespect then, is it? I mean, when you list where they've been and the problems they've had, it's not disrespectful to suggest they're going to struggle in the Premier League, because logic dictates that they would.
Absolutely, but you expect almost every promoted team to struggle. I think it was just the idea that they'll just finish bottom and they'll be swatted aside. So, but I mean, let's talk about Hull. They were fantastic. Their energy, as you say, they're up and at them, their desire, and the 2 goals from set pieces.
I think attitude-wise was spot on, because there's 2 ways it can go on your opening match, you can approach it in a way where you can look naive. Oh, we're at home and we don't care what anyone thinks about us, and we don't care how much money Man United squad costs. We can do this. And then you end up looking incredibly naive and you're just torn apart. But they had so much self-confidence. They were bristling with self-confidence. It was amazing to see. They kept their shape really well. They were very disciplined, but they were also aggressive and very happy to attack. There was no nervousness about them. The speed of the balls they whipped into the box, especially from set pieces, was really hard to defend. They were everything you want from a newly promoted team.
Hull's first league win against United since 1974 in the old second division. Brilliant start for Hull. Just finally, Gary, what do you think Manchester United need to do between now and the end of the close of the transfer window? They're Dorgu on the left. Rashford's got the number 9 jersey now and coming on at half time. As you say, they were
in the market for a left winger this summer, weren't they? As well as a midfield player. So Baleba is obviously the one they've gone for there, but you still think they still probably need another left winger, probably. They looked at Rodgers. Obviously, he'd worked there, but he knew Wilcox from his City days. He knew Carrick from Borough. But they obviously don't want to spend the money. It was very clear United this summer have got a budget for players. They didn't want to spend the money on Fernandes, who went from West Ham to Tottenham. They didn't want to. So it's clear they've got a framework they want to work in, and I think a left winger. Russia's an interesting one. Is he going to be there next week? Does anyone really know for certain he's going to be there, or someone going to take a punt? Someone going to make a loan bid for him at the end of the window?
One other thing that struck me about United was I know quite a few United fans weren't overwhelmingly in favour of Carrick getting the job because they felt he lacks something on the touchline. He's a very quiet individual, very measured. And we've seen a sort of increase over the years in managers being personalities in the dugout. And he's not one of those. He's very, very steady and calm and doesn't really seem to react to much. And this game did feel like United needed a manager to exude something from the touchline to get across to the players that they needed to react to what was in front of them. But he was just very quiet and measured.
He was asked about that afterwards.
This is the fear they have, the United fans. He hasn't got any oomph.
He was asked about that afterwards. It was kind of like, he said, "I'm being very calm to you guys, but I'm feeling the anger inside." So do you think that's just a kind of cool, calm exterior he's trying to show on the touchline? And I'm sure it's different behind closed doors.
But if we can't tell, how can his players tell? Are the players supposed to look and guess that he's angry on the inside? He should be showing it.
Okay.
He was that type of player, though, wasn't he? He was a very calm player. He didn't get annoyed as a player, did he?
No.
He was pretty measured in what he did.
Okay.
If you saw your manager going ballistic on the sidelines, would you think that's a positive or a negative?
No, I'd say it's a negative. So we should cut some slack.
It doesn't have to be ballistic, but it could be emotional. It could be demonstrative. You could be exuding some sort of energy to transmit to your players.
But I suppose he might view it as you're then sending a negative signal that you're actually more worried than you actually are.
Well, it didn't do Roberto De Zerbi much good at the weekend on the touchline. He's always one of the more emotional managers, Alyson.
I thought he was quite quiet, actually.
Brentford 3, Spurs 0. Alyson, how worried should Spurs fans be by this awful start? It
was an awful start. I'm torn between saying, well, look, their injury list was so long that this starting 11 will, isn't going to be their starting 11 again, assuming they get players back from some are minor injuries, some are just niggles, some are more serious. Players like Maddison, for example, are fit enough to play but not play for 90 minutes. Presumably his match fitness will increase and he's a really important player to them, as one example. But then you think, well, hang on, one of the big problems last season was their injury list and lack of fitness. So why is that carrying on? Why have they not? They've meant to have made changes there. Why have they not come through? Why can't we see more players out of the physio room and out ready to play? So it just seems like this is going to be a problem through the season. They can't afford for that to be. And the other thing was, I think a lot of people were expecting this to be a good season for Spurs. because they finally loosened the purse strings, and they were a team that sort of underwrote their own destiny by not keeping up with the big six in terms of splashing the cash. So they're finally spending money. But then you look at the team and you think, well, they've spent close to 100 million quid on Tonali. Sorry, he's not worth it. And I actually think that was lauded as ambitious, but I don't know of anybody who started at the start of the transfer window was saying, oh, I really hope my club buy Tonali. I hope my club spent 100 million quid on Tonali. They weren't.
I think a lot of people think the value was maybe overblown. It was
horribly overblown.
But he's a good player. He
didn't touch the ball for the first 20 minutes.
No, he had a tough afternoon.
I just think there was another debutant playing, Sangare, who touched the ball all the blooming time.
It was strange that De Zerbi highlighted Tonali, wasn't it? I thought that was a bit... And also saying about his fitness. Well, I didn't quite understand the Tonali fitness thing, given that he wasn't at the World Cup. So... Well, and the move was done relatively early.
Tom Allnut writing in the game today suggesting that the kind of extensive travel they embarked upon during pre-season, when Roberto De Zerbi saw the state of some of the pitches and didn't even allow players minutes on them, suggested that, again, they're prioritising the commercial rather than the footballing side of things.
But all clubs have to deal with that. All clubs have tours abroad, which they don't really want from a management point of view, but they have to do it for commercial reasons. They went to
Australia, didn't they? That was a fair way. And City went to Korea, and
but look,
Arsenal didn't go anywhere. They went just down the road. Fundamentally,
James, they've spent, I think, about £230 million in the summer. Andy Robertson, Senesi, Van Hecke, Tonali was 100 million. Four of their big signings all started, and it was this bad. Like, where does Roberto De Zerbi go from here?
Well, yeah, I think the nature of the defeat was a surprise, because a lot of those players that you highlighted, what they've really brought in Van Hecke and Senesi and Tonali, they brought in sort of very technical sort of control, particularly the two centre-backs, very sort of good passers, very, players that you sort of might have thought would add a bit of that ability to control the tempo of the game through passing, and for the game to sort of get away from them as it did, I think was a surprise. They clearly, though, I think it's interesting, because if you looked at the squad looking at the Tottenham squad at the end of the last season, if you'd said to me, where do they most need reinforcements? For me, I think it's the attack. That to me looks the weakest part of the squad. And obviously now they've Savinho, Marmoush has also been linked, but the nature of the transfer market, I think, is also interesting, where you're paying these huge fees really for players who are not sort of first teamers. We're seeing a lot of Premier League to Premier League transfer activity, and obviously for a lot of the time you're not buying the other club's kind of core players. You're buying players who haven't quite done it. I think there's a lot of Savinho and Marmoush kind of have enough pedigree, or have kind of shown enough, maybe, especially in Marmoush's case at his previous club, for them to sort of be exciting signings, but they're also, I think, they're certainly not slam dunks, are they? Well, not, it's not to say they won't be good, but they're not dead certs, and so yeah. But I think Tottenham are starting from a low base, aren't they? This is a team that finished 17th.
Few of the players to come back: Pedro Porro, James Maddison, Fernandes played the second half. Kudus, Kulusevski, as you say, Savinho and Marmoush likely to join. Mickey van de Ven, who's been named captain.
And their strategy this summer was to buy everyone from the Premier League.
As James says, that's been a strategy from a lot of teams.
But I think for Spurs, because in the past it was be value, but you pay that premium for the Premier League, and they've clearly decided which is a model that Arsenal went down a few, Arteta likes, and also he obviously hinted Gabi Jesus and Zinchenko from City, and it's almost like Tottenham are trying to do that similar thing, getting that little bit of the rub off you get from maybe a better club, and to try to kind of catapult them the extra bit. Maybe it will. I think they're all big fees, aren't they? As you say, James, they're all. But you pay a premium in the Premier League, don't you?
Yeah.
That's It's,
but don't you think that's laziness? I know it's a model with the big clubs. They prefer their players to be tested at smaller clubs first, rather than buy them directly from a non-English club.
It's a really interesting phenomenon, I think. We're almost seeing now I don't know what the right term is, but the kind of non-Big Six Premier League clubs, if you will, they have a bit more. They're the ones who sort of take on a bit of risk in the transfer market, and then you sort of have a phenomenon where they're kind of like de-risking some of these players, and let's pick Baleba as an example. That's not the sort of signing that Manchester United make anymore. But once Baleba is signed by Brighton and has a couple of good seasons there, then he sort of becomes an acceptable proposition for a team like Manchester United. And I do think in general, we are seeing undoubtedly the big Premier League teams, it's a much more kind of conservative approach to recruitment, in the sense that leagues have styles, players' styles, tempos, levels. Players who have played in the Premier League, yes, logically, inherently, are going to be a little bit less risky than players who have never played in the Premier League before. And in that sense, I feel that don't see a lot of punts from the big Premier League teams anymore. And in fact, it's not just a Big Six phenomenon anymore. Even some of the other top half Premier League teams now are taking from other Premier League teams. That's
a perfect segue to talk about Mamadou Sangare and Brentford, because my God, £39 million when in a midfield with up against a £100 million midfielder, and then one in the second half, £85 million midfielder in Matheus Fernandes. And they're both really good players. But as James says, Brentford are famed for thinking outside the box a little bit. This is a guy who's gone from, I think, Rapid Vienna to Lens to Brentford in the space of 12 months. But my goodness, you look good.
He's arriving at a club that's in a good place. His post-match interview, he was like, he's already in love with the club. He loves them and they love him. And that makes you automatically a better player, and you're enjoying yourself.
Brilliant start for Brentford. Not a good start for Aston Villa though, James. This is the game you were at. 4-0 win for Brighton against Aston Villa. Another team in flux. Unai Emery faces greatest test as patiently assembled Jenga tower wobbles, was the headline in your piece today. Lovely analogy there. Lot of change. 4-0 down in 31 minutes. Reduced to 10 men 5 minutes before the break. A disastrous start for Unai Emery's side.
Well, I mean, this is match day one of the Premier League, as they say. But I don't think there will be many more extraordinary minutes than that sort of 5-minute spell before half-time when Villa were already 4-0 down. João Gomez then got sent off and they were down to 10. And they, in that 5 minutes before half-time, they were it was shooting practice for Brighton. Brighton had, I think 4 shots in the space of 3 minutes. And if one of those had gone in and it had been 5-0, maybe it could have been, we could really have been looking at something quite extraordinary. Because honestly, at that point, a 7 or an 8-0 crossed your mind. It didn't.
Southampton's 9-0.
It didn't.
The record.
It didn't feel outlandish because obviously they were down. They were 4-0 down, and then they lost a player as well to a red card. Ultimately, of course, I suppose you have to say they did well to hold it to 4-0. And indeed, Emery spoke about that afterwards, saying, he was really pleased with the maturity that they showed. And it is important because, there's a massive difference between losing 4-0, as bad as that is, and losing 7-0, which could easily have happened. 4-0 is a bad day and can be written off. Had it been as bad as it could have been, things, could have taken on a whole different momentum. But I think a lot of what Villa, what the kind of Villa story is about at the moment, it's about, as it often is, it's about the kind of the feel and the mood around the football club. teams can lose 4-0, and indeed Villa, this team, as good as it has been, has had they have conceded 4 goals in matches in the past. I think it was the home game against Chelsea last season where they lost 4-1, and I think conceded 4 goals in roughly kind of as short order as they did here. So it does happen even to good teams, but clearly the fact that 95 days ago they won the Europa League and they've lost, or haven't quite lost, but have lost 4 of those first team players and another 2 in Martinez and Ollie Watkins, who maybe we'll come on to talk about. They also appear to be going. It's a huge level of turnover. I don't think what Villa are doing in some senses is that illogical. This was the team that was the second oldest, very, narrowly behind Fulham in terms of average age in the Premier League last season, average age of 28. They clearly do need to refresh a bit, and I think a lot of these departures are actually quite logical. I think in sort of pure age terms, I think Martinez, Luca Digne, even Tielemans are kind of all they're all aging out of their prime years.
Konsa's 28, I think.
Konsa, I would maybe have Konsa to me feels like one of the was one of the ones that if I was a Villa fan, I think it's Konsa and Rodgers that would maybe really hurt me.
Okay. Ollie Watkins was kind of hovering over this game as well because he's been linked with a move to Saudi Arabia's Al Hilal. And Emery was quite pointed afterwards. He in 2 separate interviews, I think the first one he said the word silence in response to a question about Watkins. And then another one he basically said, ask him why he's not here.
Well, he actually said call his agent.
Right, okay.
It was quite an extraordinary press conference. As you say, he was asked what's going on with Ollie Watkins, why wasn't he in the squad? And he said both before the game and after the game, words to the effect of, I can't answer that question. I can only answer with my silence. He's the one who has to answer that question. And then even, went as far as to say, look, Ollie has to explain the situation, call his agent, find out what's going on. Clearly reading between the lines. It's obvious that, Watkins, not even reading between the lines, he hasn't been training with the team. It's fairly clear that he wants to go.
But we should point out Villa didn't score a goal until their 6th game last season. They didn't win a game until their 7th game. So Emery's been through worse than an opening day 4-0 defeat. But as you say, the change is different. And if you step back a bit and look at some of their incomings, Manzabi still to come back in, do you think the rebuild can work?
100%, I do. And I think 2 points that I'd make. One, I think it's what's interesting to see from Villa, related to what we just talked about, at a time when there's a lot of Premier League to Premier League transfer activity, Villa, who have had a lot of success with that type of recruiting the likes of Digne, Tielemans, Martinez, all Premier League buys, they seem to be moving away from that, and you've got these slightly younger signings from some of the other European leagues like Suzuki, Manzambi, 2 players who are both very impressive in the World Cup. Manzambi has been really, really good for Freiburg in the Bundesliga. Ruggieri from Atletico, who made his debut yesterday. I think the counterpoint to Villa was that, look at a team like Leicester a few seasons ago, the season that Leicester won the FA Cup and finished, I think, 5th. So kind of a comparable season to what Villa had last season. And I think I'm right in saying they didn't lose any of their team that started the FA Cup final that summer. And then I think they only lost 2 players from that team the following summer. But the team just kind of got a bit stale together. They all sort of got a bit stale together and obviously ended up getting relegated. So I don't think what Villa are doing in terms of refreshing the team is the wrong thing at all. I think there's quite a lot of sense to it. But I think it's the extent of the transformation I think is decidedly unusual to get rid of 6 first teamers at once is always going to be very difficult. I think it's always going to be a very difficult sell to the fans, whereas, maybe 3 first-teamers, it would feel, I think, so different. 6 it's a lot of change. And I think it feels like this season might be a hard season as they kind of, enter what is kind of a rebuild, really.
Just finally and quickly, Villa shot themselves in the foot with a lot of these goals clearly and went down to 10 men. How good were Brighton?
Yeah, Brighton I think were really good. It was one of those first halves where easy to kind of fixate on some of the errors that Villa made, which were obvious, but also I think you have to give credit to the Brighton press, which was really, really good. They played with that kind of relentlessness. It was notable, I think, that one member of Fabian Hürzeler's backroom staff, I think it's one of his main assistants, one of the first team coaches, was up out of his seat at every single transition, was kind of up out of his seat and sort of really kind of, urging them on and shouting, giving his instructions and whatever.
Oh, this is a new trend, like the set piece coaches stepping up to the corner. Transition coaches up.
No, I think they played really well.
Still loads more to get into in the second half, including some almost shocks for Liverpool and Manchester City. But it's break time now, which means quiz time. Quiz question is, since Preston won the inaugural Football League season, at least one league manager has, until now, been in charge for how many years? I'll give you 3 options. Is it 5 years, 7 years, or 10 years? Find out after the break. Welcome back to the Game Football Podcast from the Times and Sunday Times. I'm Gregor Robertson alongside Alyson Rudd, James Gheerbrant and Gary Jacob. An apology, no one understood the quiz question before the break. Let me be really simple about it, okay? In the history of the Football League, at least one manager has always been in charge of their club for a certain number of years, until now. And I gave you 3 options, 5, 7 or 10 years. Any guesses?
I think 7.
Gary?
I'm still struggling on the question.
All right, I'll throw it in the bin. You're right, James, it's 7 years because Pep Guardiola left Manchester City this season. And this is a really interesting point in Bill Edgar's column this morning in the Game. There's a kind of chain of managers, a lot of them great names as well. Sir Bobby Robson, Brian Clough, Joe Royle, Sir Alex Ferguson, Arsene Wenger. Then you go to Morecambe's Jim Bentley, Wycombe Wanderers' Gareth Ainsworth, Jurgen Klopp, and finally Pep Guardiola. So the ending of the latter's 10-year spell at Man City means that the longest-serving manager is Mikel Arteta. Okay, let's go to the almost shocks now. And it was almost... Would it have been a shock? Liverpool have done a bit of an interesting summer as well, Alyson. And Dominic Szoboszlai's 99th minute penalty rescued a point for Andoni Iraiola's side. Was it deserved?
Yes. No, genuinely.
Did I ask the wrong person there, guys?
No. Genuinely, I have consistently said Liverpool would get off to a slow start. Andoni Iraola is very meticulous and very specific about what he wants, and it takes time for players to get to grips with it. I wasn't expecting it to be a wonderful start to their campaign at all. But I did think that they would be vulnerable to the counter-attack, which is a hangover from last season, I feel. Newcastle at home, when the crowd are behind them. And it was a very emotional day at Newcastle. I think that meant the atmosphere, sort of, after the tributes to Kevin Keegan, the atmosphere carried on being very heightened. I think that helps a team counter-attack at speed and with purpose. Liverpool look a little bit wobbly when they're faced with a counter. But I felt overall, if you were to take away the emotion of the fans, Liverpool had a lot of control in that game and looked the more grown-up team and didn't fashion as many chances as you'd hope. And there was various disappointing performances. But a draw felt really fair.
Newcastle clearly have had a tumultuous summer as well. They've lost a manager, lost a raft of big names. And and no one really knew what to expect from him. So this was a very, very positive start for Matthias Jesle.
There's quite an interesting contrast, I think, to be drawn between Newcastle and Villa. Two, I think, quite comparable clubs in that they've both been they're over the sort of last, let's say, 3-4 seasons have been the sort of best challenges to the sort of big six, if you like. And they've both probably out of any club had the most sort of upheaval this summer, but maybe not entirely through sort of their own conscious choice, because obviously Howe left, and if that was his decision. But the point is, it feels like Newcastle have kind of really embraced the fact that they're in a rebuild, or they have now anyway. Got a new manager in, new captain in Thiaw. Started 3 of their new signings, and they've kind of really embraced youth in what they've done in the transfer market. And it sort of feels like though there's obviously a lot of uncertainty around Newcastle, it feels like they're kind of moving into this new rebuild era with a sense of conviction, at least, and a kind of identity that they're going to go youth, energy. They've got the new manager in Jesle, who I think will be good. Which is a bit of a contrast with Villa, who obviously are kind of having a rebuild sort of forced on them, but it sort of feels like a bit more reluctantly, and they haven't quite, it's just they sort of feel a bit caught between two stools at the moment.
But there's actually probably one player who wasn't a new signing who caught the eye the most, and that's Johan Wissa, who, was part of this whole Alexander Isak departure, that whole saga, brought in as one of the kind of the replacements for him, and it didn't go well for him last season. But he was involved in all the positive play for Newcastle in this game, Gary.
No, he was very, very sharp, and he actually showed the form that Alyson probably would have saw quite much more often than most of us at Brentford, where he was quite aggressive, sharp in front of goal, quick, and I thought Elanga as well did well as well. And I hadn't realised that was his first league goal for them, which is quite something.
He's another player who underwhelmed
who underwhelmed because he'd had a really good year before that. So he was underwhelmed. But I think, go back to James' point about Newcastle and Villa, I think that's a really good point he makes about the fact that they've actually kind of had so much more turmoil this summer than Villa, with the manager going as well. And actually they've come through it, and losing their midfield is kind of, and they actually sort of come through it. But it's still early, isn't it? I don't think, with the Villa thing, I think once Villa get a few signings in, they will be a completely sort of different team. And I wouldn't want to judge Newcastle on one performance where they've got emotion helping them on the thing. Give it 3 or 4 and see whether they're kind of still the same team. But credit to Deji as well, because he didn't seem to get credit for the first goal where he hooked it, sliding and hooked it, and that pass created the first goal.
Sheer counter-attack.
2 passes down the other end.
Speed of Elanga's incredible.
It wasn't only the counter-attacks which you mentioned. I didn't. Just the simple slide passes through Liverpool seemed to be struggling with those. That was and they weren't necessarily counter-attacks. They were just sort of balls in and around, like curves around the centre back, and that seemed to be quite a fundamental thing.
That is a hangover from last season.
Liverpool have conceded more goals via fast breaks in all competitions than any other Premier League team since the start of last season. And a lot of, after seeing games in pre-season, a lot of kind of onlookers felt this was an issue that hadn't been resolved by Andoni Iraola. So there's a lot of work to do, Alyson. And also you maybe bring in the fact, how long are we going to give Alexander, it's one game, again, start of the season, how long are we going to give Wirtz and Isak to actually step up and do something?
You can't just keep that amount of money on the bench week in, week out, because they're not quite working. So there's almost an obligation to try and get them to work together. And Iraola said he felt in pre-season that they were forging a relationship, and it was quite a productive one. But it didn't look like that at all against Newcastle. And again, as Gary says, it's one match with a lot of emotion. That was a factor for maybe you could say Isak being booed consistently might have impacted on his very underwhelming performance. But I don't know how, to answer your question, there's a part of me that just thinks, just bench him because he doesn't look like he's enjoying it. Sometimes a player, his backstory is a really difficult one to. He needs to start playing brilliantly for that backstory to stop being mentioned. Going on strike, costing so much money, not hitting your stride when you first join, then getting an injury. It's just, he just doesn't look comfortable.
Wirtz is a really interesting one for me because, clearly no player when they transfer to the Premier League is ever an absolute sure thing. But Florian Wirtz is a player of the calibre that I just thought he would be brilliant. I thought he was an absolute slam dunk. This is a player who was the crown jewel in a Bayer Leverkusen team that, went within one game of pulling off an unbeaten treble of a season. They were an absolutely brilliant team, and he was the best player in that team. And I think also if you look at the data, the Bundesliga is thought to be the league that is most similar to the Premier League in terms of style and tempo and the pace of the game. And
because, as you say, that's one thing that a lot of people think he's struggling with, the physicality of the league, and that's been turned up a bit in the last couple of years.
So I am really surprised that he has. I don't think he's been terrible, but nonetheless, I'm surprised that he's struggled to the extent that he has. I also wouldn't rule out him having a great season, and we have seen players come into the league, struggle in their first season, and kind of find their feet in the second season once they've kind of made that adaptation. But I do think he's a big kind of unresolved question mark because he hasn't looked like the player that I think we all thought he was capable of being for Liverpool yet.
Alyson, do you think the problem's at centre-back or in midfield for Liverpool?
Full-back?
Full-back?
Right wing?
There's problems.
There's a few.
There's problems everywhere when you look at it like that. We're talking about very expensive attackers who aren't pulling their weight. We're talking about a defence that Areola would like them to press, but they don't. So what are they? There's a lack of identity to the defence, I would say.
Fullbacks can't defend 1v1 either. Kirky has
they
had an awful time.
Didn't have a great game against Newcastle. I think they're just not quite there yet, Liverpool, in terms of executing what the manager wants. They didn't look anything like Bournemouth, did they?
No.
So it's going to take a while for it to...
And he had a slow start at Bournemouth, which people always forget.
Well, it's the players actually said at Bournemouth, we didn't understand it to begin with. It takes time to get used to it.
It takes time. That's the precious commodity all my new managers want.
No.
Enzo Maresca would be one who agrees with that sentiment. Another almost shock against Bournemouth. Marcus Tavernier gave Bournemouth a 26-minute lead, and it took goals from Guehi and Gvardiol in the 84th and 91st minutes to give Manchester City the win. A strange team selection in this one, James. 6 players who've played almost all of their minutes for City as defenders, named in the starting 11. Mark Guehi as a holding midfielder. What did you make of that?
As you say, I thought it was an odd team sheet to look at. It's one of those team sheets that when it sort of dropped, the BBC Sport graphic wasn't quite sure what to make of it. Wasn't quite sure who was actually going to be playing in midfield. As you say, it turned out it was Guehi who was playing alongside Anderson in the midfield pivot, and Nico O'Reilly, who obviously we know was primarily a number 10 for City's youth teams, but has been really almost exclusively a left back for Man City and England at senior level. He was playing in that more advanced kind of number 10 role. And also you look at the back four, and it's a back four of 4 centre-backs, although we have seen a lot of Kusanov at right back and Gvardiol at left back. They're both kind of what you call centre-backs by trade. Not that that's necessarily a problem, and I think Gvardiol is actually a brilliant player, and he's great at left back. But yeah, it feels like a sort of it felt like a bit of an odd team, and they're clearly at the kind of beginning of that process of Maresca working out what his best 11 is going to be.
Not pragmatic though, wasn't it? And he got the win. So in his defence, he got the win. But I thought they had some problems last week at fullback against Arsenal. Kuzunov played right back against Arsenal in the Community Shield, and they got in a few times. And there's some, and the goal yesterday came on the right hand side where Rico Lewis is playing right back. So they've obviously got a few little problems they need to iron out at the fullback level.
I do think when I think about City and how they'll do this season, and what are my kind of reasons to be optimistic about City. See, number one is Erling Haaland, although he didn't play brilliantly yesterday. I still think he's, the kind of their best player. And I'm increasingly thinking that actually the second biggest plus for City is Ryan Cherki. I think he's a great player, and I think he's someone who I think will establish himself as an undisputed starter in that team.
The way he unlocked the door for the second goal was just a thing of beauty.
I think he's just he's a brilliant player.
To come, haven't they?
I was just going to say that, Gary.
They've got two midfield players they're going to bring in, but Bouhaddi, we assume he's staying and not going to go back on loan, which has been some sort of conjecture.
Well, you'd hope not for 86 million.
Well, there's a suggestion the price is accordingly because he might go back on loan. So.
Okay. Do you think he'll make a difference? Obviously, we saw...
He looked very good in the World Cup, didn't he? And obviously Arsenal were talking to him. Everyone's been talking to him. He looked so impressive at the World Cup, didn't he?
He did, but I think it's also asking a lot of a young player, clearly.
It is, yeah.
And, the World Cup and Ligue 1 are very different kind of tempo-wise from the Premier League.
But I think everyone was looking at him even before, over the winter period. And obviously Fernandes will be a very good signing if they sign him.
Only 18 years old, Bouhaddi, so it's a big move for him. But
it was a political lineup as well, wasn't it? As well as pragmatic by Maresca.
Yeah.
He sort of,
I've
got to put Mark Gay in midfield. I've got nobody.
Kovacic was probably their best player at the Community Shield last week, and to be on the bench was a little bit of a surprise that he played very well last week against Arsenal.
Just quickly on Bournemouth, I mean, of all the teams that made changes, this felt like the most continuity sort of choice in terms of Marco Rose replacing Andoni Iraola in the summer. What were your thoughts on Bournemouth's first performance under him?
Well, there was continuity for a start. They didn't look different. And they identified Marco Rose as someone who would play in the mould of Iraola, so that there wouldn't be any change. So they looked like a very seasoned team. They were confident. They have trouble going to the Etihad traditionally, so they did really well to keep it look like they were going to get the win till the end. And I think they will have left Manchester feeling really hard done to, actually, because they played with a maturity and continuity. They were nice to watch, but maybe if they can take one thing away, it's that even when you're playing a club of the size of Manchester City, when you're on top, you can just be a little bit more aggressive, perhaps. It felt the longer it went on, they were happy with the 1-0. You can't be happy with 1-0 at the Etihad. So I think they'll regret that attitude.
Just before we round up the rest of the action, as I said at the outset, it feels already like this could be a really unpredictable season in the Premier League. Liverpool, sort of tricky start. Manchester City still yet to convince. Manchester United, who a lot of people tipped, idiots like me, for a good season. That was a very difficult start. Still to see Chelsea tonight, but does it feel more up in the air? Arsenal are out on their own, that's the caveat. Among the elite for you this season as well, James? Well,
we assume Arsenal are out on their own. I think they do look the strongest team. I think it would be a surprise if they stumbled. I think it does, clearly, for all the obvious reasons. But, having said that, City ultimately did win, for all that's been said about Maresca. I think Maresca's career to this point, his CV is pretty impressive, really. Clearly, Guardiola is going to be a very tough act to follow, but he's, from what I've seen, his teams have, generally got pretty good results. And we haven't seen Chelsea, and I think I'm fascinated to see Chelsea under Alonso. I think Alonso, for me, really did show glimpses of a generational coaching talent at Bayer Leverkusen. The things he did there were extraordinary. And I don't think his reputation has been dented too much by what happened at Real Madrid, because I think everyone just kind of thinks, well, Real Madrid just kind of chews up and spits out managers. That's kind of just how it is. And clearly there was a lot going on in the dressing room there. I'm really fascinated to see what he does with Chelsea. I think they could be really good under him this season. But yeah, clearly I think it does seem that Arsenal are a step ahead.
Chelsea play Fulham tonight, of course. We'll be back on Thursday to discuss all of that. Quick round up of the rest of the action. Ipswich, great start, 2-1 win against Sunderland. Jack Clarke's late winner at Portman Road to get Ipswich's return to the Premier League after a winning start. But Julio Enciso was the star, James. Ex-Brighton forward, we've seen score some absolute worldies for Brighton in the past. Had half a season at Portman Road, then spent last year with Strasbourg and Gary O'Neill. Do you think he could be the difference maker for them this season?
I think he could be, yeah. I think just looking at their lineup, it just feels like they're taking a slightly different approach to the Premier League this season. The starting 11 looks stronger. It just looks like there's a bit more quality in the team. And Enciso is obviously an obvious example. They also had Daizen Maeda at playing at number 10, who has, done some really impressive things at Celtic. They're maybe, I would say, a slight question mark for them at centre forward. Obviously, they had Emerson starting. He could be really good, but yeah, I think Enciso is a player of who's kind of shown his quality in the Premier League. As you say, he had moments at Brighton where he looked really, really impressive. So. And they've also signed kind of two sort of very solid, experienced Premier League campaigners from Fulham in Issa Diop and Sasa Lukic. So it just looks like a team that, could be, could stay up, basically. I think they've got a chance.
Okay. Everton 2, Crystal Palace 0. Gary, John, this kind of a lot going on in the background for Crystal Palace. Difficult start for Pierre Sarge, the new manager.
Good result for David Moyes.
Excellent result.
Needed a kind of little bit of a good start. Had a few little murmurs about him towards the end of the season. Bought various players over the summer, and it's a very good start for him. I think Sage is going to have a tricky little opening period. When James sort of mentioned about which manager could have it, he could have a tricky opening because of the flux that's going on. Lots of Lacroix on the back of losing various players last year under Glasner. Although he plays similar to Glasner, he likes a bit more possession. So I think it's not going to be quite Glasner, where it's going to be bang bang and you're 3 passes at the other end. It's going to be a lot more with the ball. A little bit of noise about Wharton. Obviously, Mateta is going to would have gone in January, but for the knee injury at Milan, probably was, still maybe go this week because being offered around and, maybe will someone bite, and Palace probably being their model will probably take it with a year to go. So it feels like, and obviously Sarr, who's had an offer, it just feels a little bit, they feel like they've been unsettled. And that's, as Glasner sort of managed to kind of get through all the unsettlement that he had with Eze and other people, it's going to be new to Sage to have all that kind of, and so he may have a little of a tricky start. Plus they've got European football.
Sarr feels key to me. I sort of feel like you could maybe lose Mateta, but Sarr I think is their best attacker. So I think
21 goals last season.
Yeah. Whether hanging on to him feels crucial to me.
Yeah. I think Mateta, when he was out, they didn't really, like you said, they kind of got round it. I think they obviously don't want to lose Wharton. I can't see Wharton going this summer. I think it's probably now, they would put the hatches down. But I also think, they're going for the centre back. They've gone for Disasi. I think Lacroix had a bit more pace than maybe Disasi, and I don't know if he's going to play a high line, whether he needed someone a bit quicker.
It does feel like the quality they have at centre back has just kind of gradually sort of been eroded a little bit. I mean, I think Canvo and Riyad are good players, but it's not quite, where they were with Lacroix.
Riyad got an injury as well in this game.
Plus, obviously, they're trying to maybe phase out Munoz. Maybe they'll sell him. I think he's been excellent for the amount of money they paid for him, but he's getting to the age now where it's like maybe we'll take an offer on him. Kamada's They obviously re-signed Lerma's there, but I kind of think they probably still need. But Palace historically like to deal late. Parish likes to deal late. It annoyed various managers, and you'd imagine they'll kind of do something late, some sort of loans. Obviously they've got McNeil in, haven't they? Which they changed with Johnson.
Just quickly, any other deals you think could happen this week, Gary?
Jackson, we probably expect to go somewhere. Then with Fernandes, we expect to go. Martinelli from Arsenal probably go. Obviously, we're thinking that, like you've mentioned already, that Savino and Marmoush end up at Spurs. Gakpo still up in the air.
Jack
cannot afford to lose Gakpo.
Yeah,
he was their best player.
Yeah, fantastic goal.
Newcastle.
Fantastic goal yesterday.
Yeah.
Jackson to Aston Villa, is that a possibility?
That's a possibility, yeah. Obviously, Minte's still up in the air, isn't he? Whether he goes to Liverpool.
Okay, well,
there's going to be, obviously, Forest will probably do some stuff, won't they?
Forest need to. Forest, amazingly, this is the game I was at, didn't have a single new signing in the starting 11. This is Nottingham Forest we're talking about here.
Sunderland have taken, 2 defenders this summer? Probably, maybe with them got European demands as well.
Yeah.
Feels like it's going to be a busy week, I think, you know.
So were you impressed with Glasner as in his first?
It wasn't a great start for Oliver Glasner, no. I mean, it was a 0-0 game, very physical, and all, set plays were always going to win it. It's one of those games that the Premier League has become known for recently. Anton Stacks struck an okay free kick in the 88th minute that the goalkeeper should really have saved, so it wasn't a great start from Glasner, and he had a good line at the end where he basically said, I can't put my hand on the players' shoulders and make them play like Real Madrid. So,
Makes him sound like Jesus.
I don't expect you to be Jesus, but I think Marinakis will expect a bit more than this quite quickly. So, not a great start for Glasner. Only one game, we've left the champions till last because it seemed, a walk in the park, Alyson, really. Yeah,
well, it was all about them being champions. And Gary was there with me as well. There was just fireworks, and they kept saying, "Oh no, we're coming onto the pitch now. Oh, they're champions!" And it was, it was, that sort of occasion.
Are Arsenal going to walk it?
No, they're not. I honestly don't think they will walk it. I just don't think.
Anyone will be very close.
We're recording this on Monday, so I might look stupid and Fulham might beat Chelsea. But I think Chelsea are most likely to challenge them because for all the reasons we've been through on other podcasts. But I think they are. Big fan of Alonso, as is James, by the sound of it. Yeah, and but no, they were very compelling. There's always a potential banana skin, isn't there, if you've just won the title and there's a newly promoted team coming, you've got nothing to lose, something could go wrong, but they were in control throughout, looked really comfortable, smiling still. So we saw them smiling in the Community Shield, and we saw their players smiling at the World Cup. They are still smiling. There is a really... Arteta denied it afterwards that his players are behaving differently. He says, they look exactly the same to me. They do not look exactly the same. There was a tension there last season as they had this bridesmaid tag that was really weighing heavily on their shoulders. That's gone now. It's not even as if it's not like the Champions League was a disaster. They lost on penalties. It was a great campaign in Europe as well. They are playing with literally, not just as if they're smiling, they are playing with smiles on their faces. And I think that will be their greatest asset through the season is that lack of weight of, will we come second again? They know they can do it. So for that reason, if only that reason alone, they will be up there. They will be good.
Okay. The tough start for Coventry City. They have a chance to get off the mark, though, when they host Hull City next weekend. As we say, we've got Chelsea against Fulham on Monday night. We'll be back on Thursday to talk about all that. And we've got an EFL show, Tom and I, this week as well. Hope to see you then.